up late, taking time away from work, and just kind of giving me a little, a small opportunity to share what we are doing at the Center for Communication Excellence, the CCE, at Iowa State. So the CCE is situated in the graduate college, and you'll see that, sometimes I talk about things that are related to the ITAs, but then generally to all other graduate students as well. So before I'm going to my presentation, okay, let me see, click here. Can you still see my screen? Okay, I'm hoping. And I'm just gonna say, I'm looking at my camera here, and it's only just slides, but you people on my screen is on this side, so I really can't see you or the chat, but Mike will help monitor the chat later, and I will take questions along the way. But I wanted to share about myself. So I have been in higher ed for about more than 2 decades, working with graduate students and teaching professionals. I started with a bachelor's in education in TESOL from England, followed by a master's here at Iowa State. And then I moved into the curriculum and instruction program, but all along specializing in curriculum and instructional technology and computer-assisted language learning. My background, I was a high school teacher first in Malaysia, and then I came here for my graduate studies. I was then a graduate teaching assistant, and then I went into being a faculty for TESOL, applied linguistics, and higher ed programs in general at Iowa State, at UMass Boston, and Wilmington. And then I returned to Iowa State into the CCE and kind of worked myself in different roles. And then now I oversee more than just the ITA program. I was telling Mike earlier, I supervise several programs, including new areas that have nothing to do with linguistics. But my research areas, I'm interested in language learning technologies, teacher ed, and curriculum development. And you'll see that these elements have come together to where we are today in the Center for Communication Excellence and how I developed the programming for ITAs. So here's my timeline. In 2000, I came to Iowa State for my master's, and being an ITA myself, and for those who are international, ITA here stands for International Teaching Assistants. So being an ITA here, I took the version back then called the Speak Teach. That was 2000. After one semester, so by spring, I think spring of 2021, I was asked to teach the English 180 class that was for ITAs. So being a grad student myself, and then immediately teaching other international teaching assistants how to utilize English for teaching purposes. And I was also recruited to conduct the Speak Teach as a rater. In 2002, I graduated and with my master's, and I completed my master's based on the students that I was working with, so the ITAs. Now you'll see the yellow part there in 2002 to 2018. 2002 is when I started my PhD in curriculum and instruction. And so I kind of pivoted from applied linguistics to more teacher education focus. And in that time, I worked on multiple programming for teacher ed, online education, and did a lot of curriculum development. About 2018, I would say, while I was still teaching for UMass Boston as a faculty in applied linguistics, I started this small project with the CCE. I completed the 4-day workshop for the OECT to be a trained rater. This is now what we call the Oral English Certification Test that replaced Speak Teach. And in about the same time, I was working on the English language development program that was separate from the ITA program. And I'll talk a little bit more later. And then from 2018, 2019 till present, my role has just continuously evolved. So now I train and mentor the OECT raters. We have what we call the English speaking consultants, who are graduate students trained to work with non-ITAs but international graduate students who want to work on their English speaking skills. And we work on interpersonal as well. And I'm trying to develop a program for public speaking. And in this role as well, I oversee the policies and monitor the compliance related to institutional, local, state, federal mandates and guidelines. So I know one of the things in the ITA network, we talk about like, how do you make your stakeholders recognize that this is important, right? At Iowa State, we have the Board of Regents mandate that says, people who are non-native speakers of English that are instructors have to have some form of assessment for language and also supportive programming. And we take that mandate to anchor our ITA programs. So you'll see here, in 2015, the CCE was established. So from 2000, in the year 2000, when I was a grad student, somebody else was managing the Speak Teach task. That person retired, Dr. Elena Kotas, who spoke as well in the previous webinars for the ITAs here, ITA network here. She was the one who established the CCE, and she took on the new role of the Speak Teach assessment coordinator. And based on her research, in looking at language functions and so forth, she actually revamped our Speak Teach to be what we call the OECT today. So that's where things transformed a little bit, and it will you will see why. So once we moved from 2000 and established the 2015, I came in 2018. Our OECT raters also changed. So in year 2000, the raters were mostly professionals in the community, and graduate students from the ISU Master's TESOL program. So for example, when I was in my second year, I trained to be a certified rater. Currently, the OECT, we still have raters who are professionals in the community, and by professionals, I have one who's also a former applied linguistics student who graduated with her master's. But I have one who is a retired engineer, and he's been with us from the very early years before I started my role, and he still continues on and is a very strong mentor for our rater program. And now that the ISU Applied Linguistics and Technology PhD program, I think it was established also about 10 years ago, or almost 10 years. So we have a lot of PhD students who are interested in this training, and we hire them after they have completed our training. And in the last few years, because I work closely with chemistry and physics who employ many international teaching assistants for what they call the recitations or discussion sections, and they follow the Board of Regents mandate very closely. So they know that there needs to be a certain level of OECT before their TAs can teach those discussion sections. So they run into different issues like, well, if the ITAs arrive, then they take the test, and then the departments discover that their level of OECT is not up to the standard that they were needing them for. It kind of throws the department into chaos, because then like, oh, we can't hire you for teaching. We'll need to move you to grading. Now who's going to take over this this discussion section? So a couple of times I've recommended that they have somebody do a little pre-screening. So when they're doing the admission process, then they started hiring somebody who would have a little interview, a little phone interview, just to kind of score them and say, okay, this person's language is likely to be OECD level 2 or 3 and so forth. So they know who they're getting and where they can kind of map their students before they admit them. So that has been really helpful. But we still have the same concerns like most of you here today. When you have a test, who do you hire? How do you train them? How do you keep them? And so that rater pool for me is an issue because my rater pool comes from the applied linguistics PhD students. So they graduate and they move on. So then I'm constantly having to train people. In the last year or so, it used to be after the ITAs take the OECT and they don't get the top level, they need to take the courses to support them. The course was called English 180, English for International Teaching Assistants. Well, I said to my leadership, I said, you know, these grad students are not working on what you call that, like the very basic level of language. They are working on professional development. And so I argued that our courses should be listed at the 500 level instead of the 100 level that's for undergraduates. So we did that. But with that, it created one other challenge. To teach a graduate level course, graduate assistants can no longer teach those courses. So for example, in year 2000, I was a teaching assistant, a graduate teaching assistant, but I was able to teach the English 180 class because it's a 100 level. But today, the PhD students cannot be TAs for the 500 level classes. So we do need lecturers with graduate faculty status. And our recent concerns as well include budget cuts and then the exemptions. I'm sure TOEFL, IELTS, those kind of things. We constantly talk about like, what's your cutoff? Who can be exempt and so forth. We had that in the last couple of years. We constantly review and revise those exemptions depending on the demographic of ITAs that we're getting. But today, primarily, I'm going to look at the last two concerns here, sustainability in terms of training and micro-credentials, and then also the inter-rater reliability in terms of acknowledging world Englishes. So this is our agenda here. I'll go through the first three, and then I'll leave some time for Q&A. So training framework to certify OECD raters. Like I said before, we had a 4-day training when Dr. Kodos took over and revamped the whole OECD. So in 2018, when I returned to the university, I took that version that was 4 half in-person days of training. It's not easy to schedule 4 half days to recruit graduate students because they have their own courses. So after I took over the ITA program, I developed this training into 2 parts. The first part, I created it as a self-paced in Canvas, and that focused on the concepts and knowledge. And then we had summative assessments. And then the part 2, which is very crucial to our version of training today, is that live training. And I require them to, the trainees to finish 6 half days focusing on the application and the experience. So if they don't get 80% inter-rater reliability after 6 half days, it's not a fail. It just says, okay, you might need 1 extra day of training and so forth. So this second part here, I really brought in the concept of practicum from my teacher education discipline. And I feel that that is the very valuable learning growth that is needed. So I'll go through the next few slides all about the self-paced so that you can get an overview of what we cover. There are 4 modules you can see here. modules 1 to 4. I'll cover each of them, and then I'll pull out snippets as well so you can see what it's like. Essentially, like I said again, it focuses on the theoretical knowledge and then the technology, which is our in-house rating platform. You may have your own platform, so if you wanted to modify this, you would, try to build a little demo and so forth. In these 4 modules, I built in self-reviews and then also practice ratings. So here's the first module. We start off with an overview of what that training program looks like. We look at the first module. The first few pages here are essentially sharing about what the OECD is, how it's divided, what are the terms, what are the codes, what are the assessment levels, what are the levels and score descriptors, what's the teach, and then a little bit about the signals of effective communication. What are the things that raters should look at? And even though I use the terminology that's very content specific to applied linguistics, I think that generally any professional would be able to pick up those descriptors. If you just kind of say like, what does fluency mean? Measure it this way, or consider the kind of questions that come up when you're thinking about fluency. So don't use technical terms all the time like fluency, pace, what does that mean? So we kind of break that down into more general terms. Here are some examples, diagnostic features that we look at in our OPI part, and teach as well. But we're talking about pronunciation, prosody, fluency, vocabulary, grammar, volume, interaction pace, listening. So the paper version of our rating system had all this codes. So we needed to have like a cheat sheet and make sure that the raters recognize what all those things were. And we would, the raters would actually have to write VO and so forth and CO. The ones who were trained from way back when, they still have this, but then our technology made it easier and it was like coded already. So the platform made it easier, but we still have that cheat sheet and have raters see this. The assessment criteria here on the right is just a sample of what's the function, and then we go through for each of the ones on the left list: functions, content, context, text type, linguistic competence, comprehensibility, social linguistics ability, and all of those things. We have these little tables to show what the raters should be looking at for level 1, which is the top, level 2, level 3, and not certified. So module 2 here, we're going more into the OPI protocol itself. We talk about the 5 phases from warm up all the way to wind down. And then we looked at the possible OPI scenarios and the tips for interviewers. And then in every module, we always have the self-review and the practice rating. So I'm going to show some of those things. This is what it looks like for our OPI structure. You'll see we have 3 impromptu questions and then 1 role play. And we have phases, which is the warm up, level check, probe or level check, and then transition, wind down. And each of these phases has its specific purpose. So we also, the other concepts that we cover is the floor, which is the base of what we think the test takers can do, and the ceiling, which is the highest that we think the test takers can do. So we kind of move from the floor to the ceiling and then kind of measure where in between they actually reflect their proficiency level. So here's an example of what the raters use to ask the questions in the OPI. And you'll see the movement here in the 5 phases. The arrow kind of moves downwards, and there's many different ways you can proceed with the different phases. So this is just an example. And at the end, the role play will be kind of another chance to confirm what the raters think their levels are at. And then possible OPI scenarios here, we talk about, the same thing from here, but we spell it out like, okay, this is a test situation. It's a possible level one. Alternative test situation is a level one, but you are moving at different checkpoints. You're moving from a level one test or you're moving from a level two check. And then it moves down depending on where you go. So this is kind of part of the scenario training. Um, Again, here's another example. For this version here, we show it in a visual, then they can see, oh, okay, I'm moving from a level one, meaning I'm going to start with level one and see if they're really there. Or I'm going to start with level two and see if they go to level one or remain in level two, and then they move on. Now, with this self-paced, it's just easy to insert audio clips and then have the trainees kind of complete practice ratings, right? And in Canvas and in most learning management system, you can set this up to be like a quiz, right? And you can actually do it with multiple times, or you can do it as a one-time thing. I do it as a one-time thing where after they submit the OPI/teach scores, um, it pops up the actual score that the students receive because these were real scores. And then I also put in selected rater feedback from the actual test. And so then what I'm asking the trainees to do is like, okay, you have rated it, you compare your own. I'm not going to judge you. This is your learning growth here. So check and see where you are in terms of your scores versus the actual scores. And then if they are different, feel free to look at the rater feedback and see why did they score higher or lower than what I scored, right? And so this is all very based on self-learning, self-awareness. Module 3, now we're looking at the OPI test items. We focus on the prompt attributes, and then we compare them by the levels. And I actually have some of the students, at the trainee set, I'll say like, okay, now create me one OPI, like that spreadsheet with not spreadsheet, but the Word document with the tables, how each level 1 to 4, the questions would map out. And then again, self-review practice reviews. So the prompt attributes here, you've seen this on the left, the assessment criteria, the 7 areas. And then here on the right, we're trying to go into more explanation of what we're looking at. For example, function is what the test taker can do with the language. And we're focusing on things like, can you list? Can you describe? Can you compare and contrast? Can you hypothesize? These are the functions that we focus on. Content is a topic of the different kind of topics. The lower levels, we try to talk about very simple personal topics, but to the level ones, we talk about like global issues and so forth. So those kind of different ranges for level ones to not certified. So here's an example, level 1 versus level 2, where level 1, we're looking at ideas, and then level 2s, we're looking at facts, right? And so whether you can support opinions or just express personal opinions. So the different ways we ask questions here on the screen, you can see the 2 examples. Then module 4, this is where we look at the rater platform, the RPlat, so that they have some experience before they actually go into the platform itself. We used to have or like a sandbox for the RPlat, and I would pump my students in and they would practice in there without disturbing the actual platform. Then at some point we lost that. So they didn't get that experience before the live training, but then I tell the students, I tell the the trainees, that don't worry, you won't mess things up, because after we've done the ratings in the platform, there still needs to be an adjudicator that finalizes the scores. And I tell the adjudicator, this person is a trainee, you exclude their scores. So I say to my trainees, don't worry that you won't mess things up if your scores are off track. And this module 4 is where we have the extended practice. There are 10 samples that are considered their summative assessment, and they submit their scores to me. It's no longer like the quiz where you get the results. I look at them, and if there's 80% inter-rater reliability, you're done. If not, then I kind of, give feedback on one that's off, and I say, hey, take a look at this. This is what the raters said. This is the actual scores. Now, taking that into consideration, look at sample number 8 and number 10 again and redo them, right? And then they kind of recalibrate their understanding. It's like, oh, okay, this is where the student should be at. And typically after one round of feedback like that, they are on track. And once that summative assessment is done, the trainee can be scheduled to attend live training. Like I said before, I require 6 half days. It's a lot to be trained this way. And because we only offer the OECT at certain times, like January, May, July, August, and December, 6 half days is not easy to get. But the nice thing is in January and in August, those are my main test periods where I can test up to 70 to 100 students over several days, because those are when new ITAs arrive on campus. Typically, I advise my trainees, complete your self-training, the part 1, sometime in the summer, and then jump straight into the July, August testing, and they can be certified. If not, then they do the December self-pace over winter break, and then in January, try to hit as many dates as possible for the live training. So the most important things that come out from this practicum of 6 half days, compared to the 4-day version that I went through, there was no practice, right? It was just that half days we got a lot of theory, we practiced 1 or 2, and then we went straight into live ratings. This one here with the practice, then we have the raters ready to go whenever we need them. And the beauty of this live training is I tell all my trainees and I tell the raters in the room, raters, you are the mentors, right? And so when the trainees are in the room and in between sessions, our system is where when they submit the scores, it doesn't show who submitted the scores. It just says rater 1, 2, 3, and 4. But I know what I submitted, and I'm looking at rater 1 and rater 2. Their scores are very different from mine. I can then say, hey, I noticed that the raters here rated this person very high here, but I was much lower. What's going on? Or, wow, that was a hard one for me. I was on the fence. I couldn't tell if this was going to be an issue or that was going to be an issue. And the senior raters or the seasoned raters will then say, well, this is typically what happens. We try to look at that, and it's important for us to not be compassionate listeners all the time. Obviously, everybody who's in TESOL and applied linguistics are compassionate listeners, and you fill in the gaps, but then the raters, the senior raters will say, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the undergraduate student who's a typical Midwest person who has never heard accents, and they need to understand physics concept. The moment they miss one lecture, it's going to derail them. So you are responsible for holding the TAs here to a little bit of a higher standard than just what's the comprehension. Can I understand them enough to have a conversation? So those are the things that are really helpful. The other thing too is the interviewing skills. It is very hard to do interviewing and evaluating at the same time. And so we want the trainees to have that experience, and then they'll say, oh, I can't balance two things. And we tell them, don't worry, in our portal, that's why we have you list who was the one who interviews, because the person who interviews, the scores tend to be more lenient because you are actually interacting with the test taker and you tend to fill in the gaps of information. Whereas the people who are rating in the classroom, they are more objective to like, okay, I'm not interacting with you. I'm just listening to you. I can't understand you. I will ask you a question. If you still can't understand what I'm asking, or you can't explain to me in a different way, then that's something that we have to take into account for. What I do then is each day that the trainee rates, I create a spreadsheet that's only shared with that particular trainee. It has all the test dates and all the ratings that that person has done. And then a different column, it's the final scores by the adjudicator taking into consideration all the test raters. And then if there's a discrepancy, I flag that row. And then I put the score from the raters, and then I put some selected feedback. And so I will say, maybe after 2 days, I'll say to the trainee and say, hey, take a look at your spreadsheet, review these videos. Oh, I put the video recordings back in for them to review. So then you can remember what case that was. And then that's a chance for them to calibrate again. And then as they move through the rest of the 4 days, they continuously kind of calibrate their understanding of the radar reliability that we require. And after 6 days, if you hit 80%, you're certified. If not, I will just say, hey, I might schedule you for another 1 day just to have a little bit more practice. And they usually get to 80%. So that's the training version 1 versus version 2. Version 1, the 4 days in person in 2018 that I took versus the version 2 that we have today that has the 2 parts. And we put it so that the first part can be self-paced. We don't have to worry about that. I don't have to carve out specific days. And then part 2, they just find the schedules to meet the live training. Like I said before, July, August is preferred because our grad TAs, our grad students have fewer obligations and there are multiple test days. So 6 days is very easy to accomplish. So now I'm going to how did we move from version 2 to version 3. So micro-credentialing is our version 3. Particularly, we wanted to give our certified raters more recognition. Micro-credentials, if you are aware of what the use is, it's recognizing small chunks of learning or training. And in this particular program, since our students are from applied linguistics and technology, this is a really good micro-credential to feature on your resume. So they are publicly recognizable, and there is an Iowa State University standard that we align to. Now, when I wrote up the metadata for these badges, I also aligned this to the ACTFL OPI standards. So what it means is anybody who gets this badge, let's say somebody wants to recruit this person, they can click on this badge and they can see what this person had to go through in order to accomplish this certification. And we split it up. The first badge here, which is the protocol, is just how to administer and how to conduct. The second one is a practicum and how to assess. And then if they complete these 2 badges, then they get the certification, which means then I can now employ them. And in the works, the bottom red badge, which is the senior rater certification, is in the works. But essentially, I want to acknowledge that some of my raters, especially the graduate students, they have been with me for more than a year and a half or so. So they've done a lot of rating and they can be considered senior raters. And I want to give them recognition that they have continuously showcase inter-rater reliability, understanding what assessment means. And then also this is a process of which I can then say, hey, you get a you get a tiny little pay raise for your hourly rate. So this is what version 3 is like. In terms of the content for training, is still the same as version 2, except now I'm tagging it on to a visible micro-credential certification. So if you see one of my students with this, you can hire them because they know all about ITA assessment. So this is just a little pitch. And then for the badge itself, this is a sample. If you scan here, you can actually see the sample, but it talks about what the alignments are to the standards, what they have to demonstrate in order to get the level of certification. And like I said before, micro-credentials are something that you can share publicly. It's our badges are hosted through a credible platform, but they can show it on your LinkedIn profile and so forth. So it's a certification that travels with you anywhere you go. Similar to a transcript, except that it's not tied to the institution at all, because you can just demonstrate it anywhere you go. And you can collect badges from just anywhere, like LinkedIn or Coursera and so forth. But right now, our badges here are only for Iowa State students because it is matched to our OECT. So that's the thing. Now the last part here, I want to give a little bit of time for questions, is the research that is fed in from the doctoral students in the Applied Linguistics and Technology program. So I'm very fortunate that I have really smart graduate students at my disposal. And I am then able to say to them, hey, this is what I've been noticing. I think we need to conduct a research to investigate what's happening and how we can continue to improve our OECT rater training so that it's fair, and so forth. So this was one that we conducted in 2023. I believe we took the summer in May and July to conduct this this research. So the reason why I wanted this to be done was in the past, we had a lot of students from China and India, and that was my constant struggle. The raters would always be like, there's more discrepancy amongst raters when it comes to Southeast Englishes because of who the raters were. So you think about who my raters were. They were masters and doctoral students in TESOL, which come from, countries like China or Southeast Asian countries like India and so forth. So once we're in the same region, we can really understand those languages much easier than, let's say, that native professional that I'm recruiting from the Ames community, like that engineer, right? So because of that, it was always a struggle when we were going through training. I would always have to say, yeah, I can see your sample ratings are off because this Chinese student, there's a level 1 all the way to a level 3. Why are there 3 bands for a Chinese student or an Indian student? And it was hard to put a pulse on it. Anecdotally, I know why. Probably my TESOL students, graduate students also know why, but we can't just say, oh, I know why. It's because I feel this way. You have to have some language to substantiate it. Now, in the last few years, I was getting a lot of emails or questions from faculty who recruited West African students and say, hey, my student that I recruited from Nigeria, I can understand them perfectly, but they didn't get an OECT level 1. What's wrong, right? And so, again, we have to explain to our stakeholders that we are not measuring English for general purposes, but we're measuring English for teaching purposes, which we focus on functions and so forth. And these are the reasons why, okay? So because of that, because I was getting a lot of these questions from faculty, a little bit of pushback, I said, all right, let's take a look at the African Englishes. I don't know why, but I feel like generally there's a range as well for African students. Some of them are really good, level 1, all the way to level 3, where I cannot understand them at all. So my grad students actually did the lit review search and then pulled together some samples and looked through the samples. So what they discovered, I think in a nutshell here, is that we limited this. You see the title here, West African Englishes. West African, I think primarily like Ghana and Nigeria. Those are the ones that have more, closer to what is acceptable Englishes, with just a very minor listening modification, listening adjustment for the listener's perspective. And we wanted to anchor this within the framework of recognizing world Englishes, right? So India has their version of English, and we know that they're very fluent as speakers of Indian English, but sometimes it is hard for us. Same with the West African Englishes. But what is it that was hard? So that was what we were focusing on. And if you click on the link here to the YouTube video, it essentially talks about how we did the rater refresher training to adjust the kind of questions a rater should be asking when they're experiencing like this West African English or the South Asian English. Do I really understand it, or am I being too lenient because I'm filling in gaps, or how much time do I have to take to adjust to this person saying ah versus ah, right? So if it's just a short time, like there's something that I can adjust within one day of listening to this ITA from Nigeria, we don't try to bump them down, we bump them up, right? So that's kind of what this research does. And again, the nice thing about doing this video is then I can just pipe this refresher training back into the Canvas, and it is now what we call today as the Module 5 OECT Rater refresher training. And if ever there's more refresher training, all I need to do is just create the same way, put it back into Canvas, and this is what they do. So questions. I'm gonna stop sharing and then move the people screen back into this main section here. 15 minutes, perfect.
Great presentation, and so many great tips and strategies. Maybe I can ask one question. What have you found is successful when you get a lot of that pushback from stakeholders? Has it been for you just like showing them the rubric, walking them through everything? Because I know a lot of times we get the same thing where a professor's like, I understand them perfectly. I've known them for 2 months, but
Yeah,
it's just that disconnect that happens.
yeah. I get that quite a lot. And I would state there's another different language proficiency test called the English placement test that's required for all international students, both undergrad and graduate students. And then from there, they get placed into other English 100 level classes, whether it's for speaking or writing. And I get pushback from the students themselves saying like, hey, why do I have to take this when I've already taken the EPT, the English placement test? And I always tell my stakeholders, whether grad students or faculty, I say, the English placement test measures English for general purposes and academic purposes. So how well can you navigate your classes as a student? Now, when you are a TA, you are paid by the tuition from the undergraduate students. Therefore, you are held at a higher standard of accountability. If your undergraduate students cannot understand what you're teaching, then you shouldn't be paid, right? Because it's not so much just the language proficiency, if I cannot understand you at all because of some of the vowel or consonants, how well can you utilize the board to illustrate in some other form or method that I can still follow you? Or if I cannot follow your subject matter, can you pivot and use a different analogy or an illustration to explain that concept to me that I can apply it to, oh, okay, now I understand it, right? Those are the functions that we're looking at. And when we say, can you compare and contrast? Can you utilize analogies to explain? Can you clarify? Or um, can you listen to the question and re-summarize and reframe it before moving on to explaining the question, right? So all of those skills are very different from in the classroom where you are a student and you're working with another student in a group project. Oh, I can understand you enough to fill in the gap, and then I can still make my PowerPoint with you, but we don't have to interact as much to where that person is dependent on me for their understanding.
Mhm.
So once I explain that, it helps. And then typically I will then also go back to the rater feedback and look at what they talked about that was hard and pull up the more significant issues. So smaller things like vowel changes, that's fine. But if your let's say word stress is completely off, I cannot understand you at all because I'm expecting to hear something different. And it's just there's a lot of more communication gap that breaks down if there are significant issues.
Mhm. Well, thank you. That's a really good answer. That explains a lot. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. So I see here Lori has a question. Can you talk about how often you provide ongoing feedback and calibration of raters? I will admit that I should do it more often than not, than what I'm doing. But essentially, most of my raters that are seasoned, they're pretty close together. It's the trainees and new raters that I typically have to give feedback, and they can see it and they can calibrate every time. Like I said, when they submit the scores, they can see it. They can see how they compare to the other raters in the room. But the nice thing is I haven't had issues where there's a rater that's always off. I do occasionally get uh, two raters that are closer together, but my adjudicator completely disagrees. And that adjudicator will then say, hey, Lily, can you take a look at this one? And I'll look at it and I'll try to figure out like what's going on here. Typically, it's like a one-off that's very huge in discrepancy, but and I typically look at the situational factors, and sometimes it's just because of the time of day, or they have been rating so many days in a row that it's just become much easier to process what they're listening to, and they become more lenient versus when they should be actually a little bit more strict. Does that help, Lori?
Yeah, that helps. I'm just curious because we recalibrate before every test
Yep.
period, and I find that even the very experienced raters can, especially depending on what they're doing in the rest of their lives, if they're teaching, and they can stray.
Yes. And I've heard this conversation before in one of our ITA meetings, and I was listening to people who do the calibration or not the warm up, the refresher just before each test session. And I was thinking for my case, what I wanted to do, and I haven't done it, is to just kind of put in 3 samples in the Canvas and say, hey, before we start testing in July, please complete these 3 rating samples. And it would be more of like the same way the trainees get it. They put the scores in, and then there's a automated feedback that says this was the actual score, and these were the features that we focus on to come to this score. And I typically, if I were to do this and I want to do this, then I would just have them log their hours and they would just get paid for that hour as well. So it's easy to pump out this kind of refresher without having them come in and sit down for half a day to work with me.
So you give automated feedback when they submit those practice ratings?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, what I do is the raters will submit their scores, and then I provide, all the ratings to everyone.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
get together to talk about it, but most of the time is spent. But I think it is important that they get a chance to look at how they did. So thank you
Yes.
for that idea.
And I know that my director, Dr. Kodas, had asked me before, like, hey, can we provide or can we run a report of how their performance is over X period of time? And I just haven't had that time to do it, which is why the micro-credential for the senior rater is helpful, because that forces me to say, okay, now I have to evaluate Lily's performance over the last 2 years, and I can check like, how are you on the performance for inter-rater reliability? And then I can give feedback to that person before issuing the badge.
Do they see the results of their inter-rater reliability as far as the data?
I think it is something that I would share. Yeah, there's not any reason not to share. I think that is just substantiates evidence of where they are and if they are close to earning the badge or not.
Right.
Yeah. There's a second question for Mariam. What obstacles or problems when testing Indian speakers? So, yeah, so essentially, like I said before, in the early days when we were doing a lot of testing, I think I'm from Malaysia and I understand parallel to Indian English, Malaysian English is about the same. So we have standard Malaysian English and you have standard Indian English. And there are speakers that are native speakers of standard Indian English, fluent, right? Fluent. But then there are also some Indian speakers who are English as a second language, right? And that's where I was saying before, the exemption criteria are really tricky because I can't just say Indian students can be exempt because there's a range of speakers, some who are proficient and I can totally understand them. All I need to tell them is, hey, can you please just slow down your speech so that your listeners can kind of keep up, because I know you're really fluent, but your intonation or your prosody might be slightly different. So the undergraduate students may take a little time to adjust to your language, and that's no problem. But then there are, on the opposite side, we have Indian students who are very, very much an English as a second language speaker. And so they usually test at a level lower, and we can tell them, like, these are the things that you are struggling with. First of all, your stress, your word stress, or your grammar is really not at the level one. So the protocol is still the same. It's still using the same OPI. And then the criteria, the 7 assessment criteria are there, but it's just that when there are countries that have all the way to native speakers of their world English versus more of like an English as a second language kind of situation. Does that help, Mariam? We have about 2 more minutes, so I can take one more question or comment.
I'll ask a quick question. Lily, you guys do such
Yes.
great work there in the CCE. I love hearing about all y'all are doing. It's just really exemplary. I have a question about, your students from West Africa. They, their English is their official language. So how are they required to take that test.
Yes, that is a troubling area.
Yeah.
So, the requirements for exemptions are currently right now only for native speakers who have who come from certain L1 countries, right? And that
Mhm.
is the exemption. And then so when it is the official countries like Nigeria or even India, we say we do not accept any English as an official language. So they still
Oh,
do have to take the test.
okay.
But what we've done recently, and this is another way of trying to be fair and saying we're accepting more professional credentials, we started including an exemption where if you have taught in an English speaking higher institution for
Mhm.
at least 2 years, you
Mhm.
can apply for an exemption.
Mhm.
Because then that recognizes that you have been teaching and you have been using English for teaching purposes. And
Mm.
even though it's just an official language and not your, L1, so to speak, we
Mhm.
are recognizing that is a legitimate world language, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that is what we are trying to do, where we can budge and say, we can recognize this form of professionalism. Let's do it.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's sticky. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah. And I want to say, that we've kind of done that this last round where I just implemented this exemption. We exempted several uh faculty members from Pakistan and Bangladesh because they've been teaching in their countries in English for more than 2 years. So almost like, let's do it.
Yeah. Be interesting to do. And I've been wanting to do this too, some kind of like follow up. It's so hard though, like to get to look at student
Yeah.
evaluations or something like that to know it's so hard to know like, okay, are we not supporting them when they need support because they
Right.
had those years of experience?
Mm-hmm.
How are students responding to them? To gather that
Yeah.
kind of data is just
Yeah.
haven't been able to, but it's
And I
something.
want to
Oh.
mention that. So that's the thing. So with the ITA program, once they take the OECD, they take my GRSD 5400 class. That class is reserved for international teaching assistants only. Now, there
Mhm.
are groups of international students who want to improve their language, but if they're not ITAs, they can't take that class. So
Yeah.
that's why we have the English language development program that pumps out different versions of like what we have, what we call the one-on-one consultation models.
Mhm.
They work specifically with one student who wants to focus on improving whether it's pronunciation or functions or public speaking. They do a little diagnostic and then they work longitudinally over weeks to improve on what they want. So this
Yeah.
is our way of giving support to people who want that support.
Yeah, that's great that you have that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, all right, friends. Since we're at time, I'd like to thank everybody for your participation. Today's presentation was titled English Speaking Assessment Rater Training Program and Strategies. A special thank you to our invited presenter, Dr. Lily Compton. This concludes our presentation. I think we all learned a lot. This is a really great conversation. So thank you so much. Everybody, and thank you again, Dr. Compton. Have a great day wherever you are in the world or in the nation. Cold, hot, whatever weather is. So thank you.
Thanks, Q.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. See you in TESOL maybe.